Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to continue our conversation with Stassi Cramm. She's the president of the Community of Christ, and we're going to talk more about the Schism following the 1984 revelation. She's going to talk about some of her memories about living through that time. We're also going to talk about the controversial topic of the sale of the Kirtland Temple. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Because it was an 80% agreement in 1984.
No.
I understand. I've talked to Bill Russell and Mark Shearer, a couple of your historians, and they were there. They remember it was very rancorous, and there was a lot of really hard feelings in the auditorium. And I believe you guys have general conference every 2 or 3 years?
2 years back then, Now we're every 3 years, yeah.
And so I believe it was probably 1986, there was a resolution to rescind the 84 revelation, which didn't pass.
Right.
But I think it shows how strongly the opposition felt.
Yes.
And so that basically led to a schism within your church. Is that right?
Oh, definitely. And it was near immediate. Again, I wasn't here. The historians could give you facts better, so I probably have folklore more than I have like facts. But I know that in the stakes around this area, there were padlocks being put on doors, debates over who owned property, as like whole congregations pulled away from what was then the RLDS church. There had been some guidance written as to how to navigate things. And I would never pass judgment because, every era is its own space and context is so important. But as we have looked backwards and as we moved in the, early 2010s to considering other significant questions related to same-gender marriage and the ordination of people in committed relationships where marriage wasn't allowed for same-gender couples, we knew that had just as much potential to take the church and divide it again. And so we tried to approach it more slowly through a spirit of study and conversation and exploration. So several years of intentionality around the United States working on that. And then we developed what we now refer to as the principles of faithful disagreement, which said, even once we make a decision, it's clear that there will be people who do not agree with the decision. And we are not going to judge them as unfaithful. We're going to live in the space that we're all trying to discern God's will. And because probably of our humanness and our imperfections, we do not always come to the same understanding. And yet we have to make certain decisions and move forward. And so we tried to create a much more open space where people who had a differing opinion were not immediately ostracized, weren't somehow categorized as being weak in faith, weren't not allowed to continue preaching and stuff. Now, agreements, we don't use the pulpit for the divisive discussions. We use the pulpit for the proclamation of what God is calling us to be. But, so we tried to create a space. We definitely still lost people in 2013 after the U.S. implemented new policies on same-gender marriage and ordination for people in same-gender relationships, but not to the same degree. And that does not mean that everyone in Community of Christ believes those policies are faithfully representative of God's intent. There are still people in Community of Christ that do not believe women should be ordained.
Still.
And some of those people raised their hand in opposition to my call in June, at the conference. And that's okay, because they are trying to faithfully represent their best understanding, and they're still committed to all the other aspects of mission where we do have common agreement.
So it's funny because, in the LDS church, you talked about common consent in the Community of Christ a couple nights ago, and then in the LDS church, most votes are pretty much unanimous. Occasionally you'll get somebody that disagrees. And especially in general conference, they will say, if anybody's opposed, show. And so occasionally if you'll get a few people, and then they'll say, well, go talk to your stake president. Whereas in Community of Christ, I've actually had the opportunity to go twice to
great.
World Conference. And there was none of that. It was like, okay, we heard you. But not only that, I think one of the, especially for people who are LDS, the thing that I found so interesting, you have podiums around in the auditorium. And then, so you'll present a resolution. It's very legislative, not like LDS General Conference where it's just a lot of sermons. But whoever's chairing, a lot of times it's you or somebody else in the First Presidency. We'll call on Rick Bennett speaking in English.
Lectern 7.
For 2 minutes at Lectern 7. And
to
he's
speak
speaking
for or opposite. Yep.
And so...
You did attend. You got good memory.
And also the other funny thing is, and you need to speak slower for our translators.
Please slow down.
And so in the LDS Church, sometimes there's no, you at least from my perspective, it feels like you just really can't talk to the prophet. And then literally in the room, the prophet is recognizing you to say, tell me how you feel.
Yep.
And so to me, it's so astonishing. I think it's cool in a way. I think a lot of LDS people would be uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
But you get to talk, the prophet gets to hear you whether they want to hear you or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is that like? You've only been the prophet for a couple of months, but you've been in the First Presidency for several years.
Yeah, 9 years prior.
And so is that uncomfortable for you? Especially when they're in opposition to something maybe you support?
So it's uncomfortable not for why you think it's uncomfortable.
Okay.
So it's not uncomfortable that you're hearing someone, speak against something that maybe you're in favor of. It's uncomfortable because you're nervous. And, because there's all these people out here who love the church, who love the church's mission, who are concerned with where the church is going, who may be really happy with where the church is going or really frustrated. And so it's uncomfortable because, I don't know, I feel like you hold all of that as the presider.
You've got a spotlight on you.
Yeah, and you're feeling all of those emotions, of the room coming in, and what you're wanting to do is create this safe space where everyone can, feel like they have the opportunity to be heard. Now, if you were there, you probably know that sometimes we end up moving to a vote and there's a whole bunch of people that were in the queue that did not get to speak. And, and sometimes that's very frustrating, to people. But the one thing we do try to do is what Robert's Rules calls the rule of alternates. So when a person moves a resolution, then they get the first opportunity to speak for it. And then the next opportunity is for someone who wants to speak against it. And at that point, we try to alternate between for and against, and see where the body wants to go. And so, but hearing people share, to me, it's the utmost respect that they are willing to stand and to express their heartfelt reason for why something should or should not be supported by the body. And every now and again, we have to caution the body, because if they start getting a little wound up, and no one's ever booed someone, but we will have scenarios where you'll have suddenly a group that will start applauding because they, and it's no, this is a safe space for everyone. And there are times when we have to call things out of order, and resolutions that get, that got brought forward by a mission center that they feel really strongly about.
And a mission center is like a stake. Have you renamed it from stake to mission center?
Yes, we used to have districts and stakes and metropoles. So our mid-level judicatories had all these different names. And yeah, back in 2000, we introduced new bylaws, and now all of our mid-level judicatories are called mission centers around the world. So yeah, thank you. And so congregations form mission centers, and then mission centers send delegates to World Conference and form conference. But a mission center is where a resolution comes from. So if someone wants the church to consider something, they write a resolution, they get their mission center to pass it, and then it gets submitted to World Conference. But sometimes they write resolutions, and we have teams that provide them guidance. Not everyone listens to the guidance. Not everyone seeks the guidance. And so sometimes they will write resolutions that are in conflict either with our scriptures or with the doctrine, or with our Doctrine and Covenants, or with the bylaws. And so as presiders, we are bound by previous resolutions, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the bylaws. I mean, those are our operating boundaries. And so this most recent conference, we had a couple that we had to call out of order. And that always feels bad too, because it represents some desires by the people, even though the way they've expressed it, we can't move on. So
I have so many ways I want to go here. And it deals with that issue as well as the recent sale of the Kirtland Temple. I really want to dive into that, but since you mentioned that, there was a resolution this previous conference that was brought forward, which basically said, I'm going to paraphrase, and you can correct me if I say it wrong, but basically, we're unhappy that you sold the Kirtland Temple, and if you ever try to sell any more church properties, you need to get approval from us, because the Kirtland Temple was kind of sold behind closed doors, and we don't want that to happen again.
Right.
That was ruled out of order, which I'm LDS. I don't understand all these Robert's Rules of Order and everything, but I didn't understand why. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, and I think you definitely summarized the essence of the resolution, the spirit.
Yeah. It was whereas.
Yeah. Therefore, be it resolved, resolved. And they were focusing particularly to this temple and to the auditorium in particular. But then there were also some references to like campgrounds and other properties that we own. So both in the Doctrine and Covenants, well, actually, its basis is in the Doctrine and Covenants, and it's in the early sections. So I'm not a good scholar of like our sections versus your sections, but I think the section, that we were referencing off the top of my head, I think it would be in your Doctrine and Covenants as well. But it talks, and now I'm paraphrasing because I don't have them all memorized. It talks about the role of the presiding bishopric as overseers and stewards and trustee over all things held by the church. And so the resolution, and then there's a series of other things related to the responsibility of the First Presidency to do what is in the overall best interest of the church as sustained by the World Conference. So in other words, it's not that the World Conference doesn't have a vote in some of these other kinds of questions, but their vote is in putting leaders in place. And then once they've put leaders in place, there are topics for which those leaders have to act in their leadership responsibilities and for the overall best interest of the church. And so all those big decisions don't necessarily go back to the World Conference for every one of them, to be approved. What we try to do through World Conference is establish principles that guide us, and then leaders are bound by those principles. So this would have established the principle that that business transactions related to the state, related to the status of selling various real estate, would require World Conference action. And it was ruled out of order because it bumped against the scriptural authority of the presiding bishopric and the First Presidency, and also against the legal authority that has been established through our bylaws.
Okay.
So that's why one of the other resolutions that came forward was for a bylaws exploration team. So our bylaws are 25 years old, and so they do probably need to be updated. That resolution did pass. We did not call it out of order because it's perfectly appropriate for the body to say we need to look at the bylaws and potentially, change them. But what we won't be able to do is we will not be able to implement bylaw changes that are not consistent with our interpretation of Scripture. And so people that want to take away the presiding bishopric's authority, that would require probably a new section of the Doctrine and Covenants and a total new interpretation of the presiding bishop's role, not just a bylaw change.
So I heard an argument here. I'll play the advocate or the whatever adversary for just a moment.
Sure.
Even though I'm not even a member of your church.
That's okay. I love a good debate.
I've heard people say, the Kirtland Temple was revealed by revelation back in, I want to say the 1940s. I might have the year wrong, but there was a question about maintaining it and should we sell it? And the explanation was it was given by revelation. It needs to be sold by revelation. And some people will say when it was sold a couple of years ago, it was not sold by revelation. And so that's why, I think that's a big reason why there was a lot of unhappiness when it was sold. What would you say to that?
That I have not heard that argument. So
okay.
I've received a lot of letters,
I bet you did.
And I've sat through a lot of online and in-person kind of town hall meetings about the sale.
And you even answered one of my questions.
Oh, okay. And the fact that it wasn't a revelation that led to the sale, I personally, I've not encountered that explanation. Huh. So I don't feel like really, I don't really know what I would say about that in this moment because I haven't even thought about it. I think what I have heard people say, and I do understand this, is, and I said it on Friday night, we're really committed to common consent. We're really committed to the prophetic voice of the people. And I think I even said in my keynote on Friday, and when there have been times, and there have been multiple times, when leaders have had to make decisions about things, and leaders have had to do it based on the authority of their roles and have not taken it back to World Conference even for input, even if they didn't have the authority to make the decision, then if someone feels really strongly about that topic, then that feels disingenuous because it feels like, oh, well, you say you're committed to common consent, but here was this big thing, and you did not bring that back to World Conference. And as we've explained in various, question and answer sessions, we had extensive conversation about whether or not there should be any notice, to the church, or even like straw polls, so to speak. Well, how does the church feel about this? For a variety of reasons. Not the least of which is, obviously this was, it was like one of the most difficult decisions that leaders have had to face.
Is this right up with 1984?
In a different way, and yet, as there was just this multi-year struggle, there was also this realization that if the conversation became like too public, there was really only one group that could put together the level of dollars that was going to be required for us to consider a shift in ownership.
That's the LDS.
And that was the LDS Church. And people have said, well, there's rich people that would have done this. There's rich, and I will tell you that we were pretty thorough in our exploration of what was possible. And so historians will have to judge, but to the best of our ability, we pretty much vetted what we considered to be all of the possibilities and whether or not any others were really real, and came to the conclusion that the LDS Church was probably the one and only place where we could come to an arrangement that made sense for us as well as for them. And I mean, they had to evaluate their part. We had to evaluate our part, because part of it too was we wanted to make sure that it remained accessible, that it remained maintained, that it remained a historical place that people could go. And so, so we couldn't, even to begin the conversations, we entered into an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, because although it was a spiritual and an ecclesiastic activity, it was also a business transaction. And
Was
so
that more, because, the LDS Church gets a lot of, I don't know if flack is the right word, about they want to keep everything confidential. Was that more the LDS Church wanting the NDA, or was that the Community of Christ that wanted the NDA?
I would say it was a mutual agreement. We wanted to be able, to manage how information would get released and at what point. And so, to the LDS Church leaders' credit, I felt like, both parties came to the table with mutual respect and with a spirit of egalitarian, everybody was equal. And we debated topics until we did come to 100% agreement. When there's only two parties, you kind of have to, right? but that's what it took. And and it would not surprise them at all. They know that we needed to maximize dollar-wise what we were willing to part with ownership over. And I know that there have been some, you should have gotten twice that, you should have gotten 5 times that, the LDS Church has, really deep coffers. Well, this wasn't a matter of how, deep their coffers are. This was a matter of what was fair and reasonable in this day, in this time, at the current, value of the dollar. And we weren't trying to stick it to them, so to speak. I know that's not a very polite way to say it. And I don't believe that they were trying to stick it, to us. And there were multiple times where we walked away from the table and said, well, maybe this isn't going to work. And, and we'd take a break and, and then we'd come back together. If we had a World Conference resolution that said, so let's say we acknowledge that the World Conference didn't have the authority to make the decision, but, we could have asked them, well, what do you recommend? Do you recommend selling, or do you recommend not selling? It's like, what would we have necessarily even done with that? If they had recommended selling, then we go into a negotiations table and, and the people across the table are like, well, your members have already agreed to sell things. Because, part of our comment in the negotiations was, this is a big deal for us. And this is a hardship, and this is disappointing, and this is going to create anger and sadness, so that was a place where we were able to represent the body and express it. If the body was feeling all of that, but they had approved a recommendation, to sell it, then it would have put us in a weaker position, with our colleagues. The flip side is if they said, don't sell it, and we were running into, what was going to be then another very big financial shortfall and a need, to further reduce budgets. And at some level, we were going to destroy the very essence of our ability to function in all of the nations around the world where we legally exist. And so that gets back to, there is a legal obligation of leadership to do the very best we can to keep the church functioning. So I'm talking from the business side, recognizing that then all of this was wrapped in the emotion, and there was a deep sense of discernment that God was calling us to invest in future mission, and that we were not denying or turning away from our previous story. In fact, if anything, it was underscoring and putting exclamation points on how important the story that had brought us to this moment was, and yet that we could continue to celebrate and uphold that story even in the absence of ownership. And if we were no longer able to be good stewards over the building, and then the building fell into disrepair, that was in no one's best interest. So it was just this multifaceted, multi-dynamic scenario. And that's where we said, there's no way we can give the 2,800 delegates of World Conference enough information to be able to make an informed recommendation. And so this is one of those times where the delegates have to trust the leaders whose calls they sustained to do the very difficult job of leadership in this moment.
So where do I want to go next here?
I know I don't have short answers. I'm sorry.
No, this is
these
fantastic.
are so complex. I mean, these are big questions. Oh, okay. I'm good at tangents.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Stassi Cramm. She's the president and first prophet of the Community of Christ. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about how she sees the possibility of calling a gay apostle.
I guess if the question that we're asking is about someone's sexual orientation, we're asking the wrong question. Because for me, it is about who is God calling when we prayerfully consider a particular position.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.